The sun hung low over the dusty town of Redstone, casting long shadows across the cracked earth as Claire Monroe stepped into the rusty Spur Saloon. Her boots thudded against the warped wooden floor, drawing every eye in the smoke-filled room. She was no stranger to danger, having ridden across the frontier alone after her father's death, but the air in this place felt heavier, charged with menace. The saloon was a den of outlaws, gamblers, and drifters, their faces weathered by hard lives and harder choices. Clara's hand rested lightly on the pistol at her hip, a gift from her father, its weight a quiet comfort. She'd come for answers. The rumors swirled that the man who killed her brother was here, hiding among the whiskey-soaked crowd. The bartender, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, nodded her way, but his eyes darted nervously to a table in the corner. There, surrounded by rough men, sat Jace Carver, a notorious gunslinger with a smile sharp as a blade. Clara's heart pounded, but she held her ground, her gaze locking onto his. The room grew quiet, the clink of glasses fading as tension coiled like a rattlesnake. She knew confronting Carver could mean her end, but she made a vow on her brother's grave to see justice done. As she took a step forward, the saloon doors creaked behind her, and a shadow loomed. Whispers rippled through the crowd as someone had spotted an Apache warrior nearby, a lone figure tracking through the desert. Clara's instincts screamed danger, but she couldn't turn back now. Carver's men rose, hands on their guns, and the air crackled with the promise of violence. She steeled herself, unaware that the warrior outside was no stranger to her past, a man bound to her by a debt older than the feud that brought her here. The saloon was a powder keg, and Clara stood at its heart, ready to light the fuse. Outside, the Apache warrior, known only as Tarak, crouched in the fading light, his eyes fixed on the saloon. His face, etched with the lines of a life spent surviving, was unreadable, but his heart carried the weight of a promise. Years ago, Clara's father had saved him from a trapper's noose, and Tarak had sworn to protect his family. Now, word of Clara's reckless quest had reached him, carried by the wind and the whispers of traitors. He tracked her across the desert, moving like a ghost through canyons and over mesas, his bow and knife his only companions. The town of Redstone was a viper's nest, and Tarak knew the men inside the saloon would not hesitate to kill a woman who challenged their kind. His hand tightened around the hilt of his blade as he studied the building, its flickering lanterns casting airy glows through the windows. He could hear the low hum of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, and then a sudden hush. Clara had made her move. Tarak's instincts, on by years of war and survival, told him the moment was near. He slipped closer, his moccasins silent on the sand, his body blending with the shadows. The saloon's walls were thin, and he could sense the danger within, a storm waiting to break. He thought of Clara, her fierce spirit, her unyielding resolve, and the memory of her father's kindness burned in his chest. Tarak had no love for the white man's world, but for her, he would enter it. He checked his weapons, a quiver of arrows, and a knife sharp enough to split bone. The town was quiet, save for the saloon, but he knew eyes were watching. Redstone was a place where trust was a luxury, and Tarak trusted no one. As he neared the doors, a shout erupted inside, followed by the scrap of chairs. Clara was in trouble, and Tarak's blood surged. He would fight his way in, no matter the cost, to keep his vow. Inside the saloon, Clara's voice cut through the silence like a whip. She called out Jace Carver, her words steady despite the fear gnawing at her gut. The gunslinger leaned back in his chair, his smile widening, his eyes glinting with amusement and cruelty. His men fanned out, forming a loose circle around her, their hands hovering over their holsters. Clara's fingers twitched near her pistol, but she knew she was outnumbered. The saloon's patrons watched, some with curiosity, others with pity, but none dared intervene. Carver rose slowly, his spurs jangling, and mocked her for thinking she could avenge her brother. He admitted to the killing, his voice dripping with pride, describing how he'd gunned down young Tom Monroe in a duel over a card game gone sour. Clara's vision blurred with rage, but she held her composure, knowing a single wrong move would end her. She demanded justice, her voice ringing with defiance, but Carver laughed, offering her a choice: he'll live or die. The air grew thick, the tension a living thing, as Clara weighed her odds. She could draw and maybe take Carver with her, but his men would cut her down before she could reload. The saloon doors were too far, and the windows offered no escape. Just as she braced for the fight, a commotion outside broke the standoff. The doors burst open, and Tarak stormed in, his presence like a thunderclap. His bow was drawn, an arrow trained on Carver's chest, and his eyes burned with a fury that silenced the room. Clara's breath caught as she hadn't seen Tarak since she was a girl, but she knew him instantly. The saloon erupted in chaos as Carver's men drew their guns, but Tarak was faster, his arrow flying true, pinning one man's hand to the wall. Clara seized the moment, diving for cover behind a table, her pistol now in hand. The fight had begun, and she was no longer alone. The saloon became a battlefield, a blur of the motion and noise. Tarak moved like a shadow, his knife flashing as he disarmed another of Carver's men, his movements precise and deadly. Clara fired from behind the table, her bullets finding their mark, but the odds were still against them. Carver, no coward, drew his twin revolvers and unleashed a hail of lead, splintering wood and shattering bottles. The patrons scrambled for cover, some crawling under tables, others fleeing through the back door. Tarak and Clara fought as one, their instincts aligned despite the years apart. She covered him as he closed the distance to Carver, her shots keeping the gunslinger's men at bay. Tarak's arrows were silent but lethal, each one finding a target with terrifying accuracy. Yet, Carver was cunning, using the chaos to slip toward the bar, where he grabbed the bartender as a shield. Clara's heart sank. The bartender was no innocent, but she couldn't risk an innocent life. Tarak, sensing her hesitation, signaled her with a glance, his plan unspoken but clear. He vaulted over a fallen table, drawing Carver's fire, giving Clara a chance to flank the gunslinger. She moved low, her boots slipping on spilled whiskey, her pulse racing. The saloon was a haze of smoke and gunpowder, the air thick with the stench of blood and fear. Clara reached the bar, her pistol trained on Carver, but he was ready, his gun pressed to the bartender's temple. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Clara, Tarak, and Carver locked in a deadly triangle. Then Tarak acted, throwing his knife with such speed it was a blur, catching Carver's sleeve and pinning it to the bar. Clara fired, her bullet grazing Carver's shoulder, forcing him to drop his hostage. The bartender scrambled away, and Tarak lunged, tackling Carver to the ground. The fight was far from over, but Clara felt a surge of hope. Together, she and Tarak were unstoppable. The brawl spilled into the street as Carver's remaining men dragged the fight outside, their guns blazing. Clara and Tarak followed, their movements synchronized, a dance of survival honed by necessity. The townsfolk of Redstone scattered, their shouts lost in the gunfire. The moon had risen, bathing the street in silver light, turning the dust into a ghostly haze. Clara's pistol was nearly empty, but she scavenged a rifle from a fallen outlaw, its weight unfamiliar but welcome. Tarak fought with a ferocity that awed her, his bow discarded for close combat, his knife and fists a whirlwind. Carver, bloodied but unbowed, rallied his men, his voice booming with commands. He was no ordinary gunslinger. His reputation was built on cunning as much as skill, and he knew the town's layout better than anyone. He led his men toward the livery stable, hoping to mount horses and escape. Clara and Tarak gave chase, dodging bullets and leaping over crates. The stable loomed ahead, its doors open, the scent of hay and horseflesh sharp in the night air. Clara's lungs burned, but she pushed on, driven by the need to end Carver's reign of terror. Tarak, sensing the trap, grabbed her arm, pulling her behind the water trough just as a volley of shots rang out. The stable was a fortress, and Carver's men had the high ground, firing from the loft. Tarak whispered a plan, his voice calm despite the chaos. He would draw their fire, using the shadows to his advantage, while Clara circled around to the back. She nodded, trusting him completely, and slipped away, her rifle ready. The night was alive with danger, but Clara felt a strange clarity as she was no longer just a sister seeking vengeance. She was a warrior, fighting alongside a man who'd crossed the desert to save her. The stable was a maze of stalls and shadows, the horses snorting and stamping as gunfire echoed. Clara crept through the back entrance, her rifle raised, her senses sharp. She could hear Carver's voice, taunting Tarak, mocking the Apache's loyalty to a white woman. Clara's blood boiled, but she kept her focus, moving silently past the stalls. Tarek was outside, drawing the outlaws' attention, his silhouette a fleeting target in the moonlight. Clara reached the loft ladder and climbed, her boots barely touching the rungs. From above, she could see Carver and two of his men, their guns trained on the stable doors. She took aim, her hand steady, and fired, dropping one man before he could react. The other turned, but Clara was faster. Her second shot true. Carver spun, his eyes wild with rage, and fired blindly, his bullets splintering the loft's beams. Clara ducked, her heart pounding, but she held her ground. Below, Tarek burst through the doors, his knife flashing as he took down another of Carver's men. The gunslinger was alone now, his back to a stall, his revolvers empty. Clara descended the ladder, her rifle trained on him, her voice cold as she demanded his surrender. Carver laughed, a bitter sound, and lunged for a pitchfork, but Tarek was there, his knife at Carver's throat. The fight was over, but the tension remained. Clara wanted justice, not murder, and Tarek's eyes held the same resolve. They bound Carver's hands, dragging him into the street, where the townsfolk had gathered, their faces a mix of fear and awe. The sheriff, a coward who'd stayed out of the fray, emerged, promising to lock Carver away. Clara nodded, but her eyes were on Tarek, gratitude and something deeper passing between them. With Carver in custody, the town seemed to exhale, the night settling into an uneasy calm. Clara and Tarek stood outside the sheriff's office, the stars bright above them. She wanted to thank him, to ask why he'd risked everything, but words felt inadequate. Tarek spoke first, his voice low, telling her of the debt he owed her father, a story of kindness in a world of cruelty. Clara listened, her heart heavy with the weight of her family's loss and the man who'd fought to protect her. She asked him to stay, to help her rebuild the ranch her father had left behind, but Tarek shook his head. His place was not here, in a town that would never fully accept him. He belonged to the desert, to the winds that carried his people's songs. Yet, he promised to watch over her, a guardian from afar. Clara felt a pang of loss, but she understood some bonds didn't need a shared roof to endure. The townsfolk began to approach, offering thanks and weary glances at Tarek. They saw him as a savior now, but Clara knew their gratitude would fade. She gave him her father's knife, a token of her trust, and he accepted it with a nod. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Tarek mounted a horse stolen from Carver's gang and rode toward the horizon. Clara watched him go, her hand on her pistol, her resolve stronger than ever. She'd faced danger and survived, not alone, but with the warrior who'd carried her through the fire. The town would talk of this night for years, a legend born in a saloon's chaos. Clara returned to the saloon one last time, its doors now quiet, the bloodstains scrubbed from the floor. The bartender offered her a drink, his hands trembling, but she declined, her business here done. She stepped into the street, the town waking to a new day, its people forever changed by the night's events. Clara's heart was lighter, the weight of her brother's death eased by justice, though not erased. She thought of Tarek, riding alone, and wondered if their paths would cross again. The frontier was vast, but fate had a way of weaving lives together. She mounted her horse, her eyes scanning the desert, knowing he was out there, a shadow moving with the wind. The ranch waited, a place of memories and new beginnings, and Clara was ready to face it. She'd fought in a saloon, stood against a killer, and found an ally in a man who owed her nothing yet gave everything. The townsfolk watched her ride out, their whispers following her like dust. Clara didn't look back as she carried her strength within, forged in fire and blood, tempered by a warrior's loyalty. The Apache had fought his way in and carried her through, not in his arms, but in spirit, a bond that would endure beyond the horizon. As the sun climbed higher, Clara rode toward her future, a woman unbroken, her story just beginning.